Hello and welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey. My name is Art, and today we're continuing our exploration of Fahrenheit 451, there it is, by Ray Bradbury. And we're going to begin part 2 in our read-along, and part 2 is called The Sieve and the Sand. Just a couple of quick things before we get started. I don't have a lot of comments to share, other than a few of you have been leaving comments. I really appreciate that. So please continue to leave comments when you watch these videos. Also, I will be recording today both parts of part 2 in both discussion videos. So my video concluding part 2 next week won't contain any comments that you might have made on this video, but I'll deal with all those when I get back from vacation. We'll be taking a 2-week break here. Also this week, I'll be putting out a video discussing Ray Bradbury's short story, The Jar, and that will be a part of our Ray Bradbury Short Story Club. So if you're part of that, be reading The Jar, and that video should come out about Wednesday. I think I have it scheduled. So if you like Bradbury this week, you'll want to hang out on my channel. So make sure to like and subscribe, as that really helps the channel grow. All right, let's dive in to part 2, The Sieve and the Sand. Where we pick up from last time, Montag and Mildred have spent the afternoon reading these books, trying to look at them. Montag, you can tell it's affecting him, but Mildred is just getting frustrated with the whole thing. I like at the beginning paragraph, it says that the wall was lit with orange and yellow confetti and skyrockets, and women in gold mesh dresses and men in black velvet pulling 100-pound rabbits from silver hats. You know, it's just a sentence, but it reminds me of how throughout this book, the imagery that Bradbury uses, you get a lot of fire colors, you know, like the orange and black, the orange and yellow. He weaves that in through in just some of the imagery, and I think it's pretty neat, kind of a subtle approach to what to the atmosphere that he's adding. Anyway, Montag comes across this quote that I thought was really fascinating. I won't take the time to read all the quotes that he uses and all the book allusions he makes, but this is the one that I really liked. It says, he read this aloud, that we cannot tell the precise moment when friendship is formed. As in filling a vessel drop by drop, there is at least a drop which makes it run over. So in a series of kindnesses, there is at least one which makes the heart run over. And that's a quote from, I believe, from the Life of Samuel Johnson by James Boswell, and talking about friendship. And I think that's such a beautiful quote that Montag says, you know, this is like Clarice to me, and that he doesn't know when they became friends, but they did. And I mentioned, I think in the second video, that I hope that you had a Clarice in your life, someone that you could count as a friend who would challenge you and change your worldview and push you on to being better and a better version of yourself. But I like that you know, there's just a series of these little things that suddenly you realize this person has become a friend. And, you know, Mildred doesn't want to talk about that. She says she's dead. Let's talk about somebody living. And then I had to laugh because this other quote says, that favorite subject, myself. And he repeats it, you know, and then Mildred says, now that one I understand, which is really kind of funny, but kind of sad too. I think she's kind of representative of what the United States has become. That it's in the book, you know, as a nation of narcissists that only seek pleasure. I think, was it SparkNotes referred to them as narcissistic hedonists, which is quite a mouthful, but it's, you know, a society that only pursues pleasure and focused only on themselves. And that's what the nation had become. Because again, without books, you lose empathy, you lose, you know, kindness. At least that's Bradbury's proposal. Eventually, Mildred just gives up. She goes back to watching the TV Family, and, you know, she's worried that Beatty will come and burn the house and the family. And she asks this really great question. She says, why should I read? What for? And that's such a That's such a profound question. Why should we read? Why do we do it? To be entertained, to learn, to discover? I don't know. I think that's a question I don't know if I could answer right now even. I might need to think about it. But what about you? How would you answer that? Why should I read? What for? And Montag gives her this story about how he saw a snake that was dead, but it was alive. And he's talking about the snake that, pulled out all the sleeping pills out of her and how she almost died. And he tells her, to listen. And I see that word listen pop up a lot in Bradbury's writings. That's something else I might want to think about, and how he uses that word, to listen, to pay attention, to focus on what you're doing. You read this quote in context, you might think he's saying, listen, to the planes, the bombers that flew overhead. But I think Bradbury uses that word throughout his writings. And now whenever I see it, it kind of jumps out at me. But maybe something else I'll think about more. I had to chuckle because he says that we've started and won 2 atomic wars since 2022. So this is the future, but, that's like right now. And you look at our news today and, it feels like we're on the precipice of another, perhaps World War III, or could be nuclear war. Who knows? I hope not. I don't know. I maybe a little bit of fortune telling that Bradbury is able to predict there. But he goes on to talking about why we should read, that it's what these books teach us. He says that maybe the books can get us half out of the cave. They just might stop us from making the same insane mistakes. That we might learn something and not repeat that mistake. And that's why we read. And that's why we shouldn't burn books, and we shouldn't, change books and desensitize, or, and why we shouldn't censor books is because they teach us. You might not agree with a viewpoint of what you're reading, and that's fine, but it creates healthy dialogue, and it helps us to think through an issue that we might say, I might have a wrong point of view. So let's read another person's point of view and learn and grow from that. And at the very least, it helps us to face, our demons of the past, to say, here's what we used to think, here's what that looked like, and how can we now do better? Mildred goes off to watch the family, to watch television basically, and then Montag remembers a man named Faber. And he had an interaction with Faber about a year ago, and he believes that maybe Faber is what started him on this path of rethinking, reevaluating everything. Kind of along with Clarice, of course, but this has been in play already. He calls Faber and wants to go and see him. So he grabs the book that he had stolen and takes it with him. And then on the way to Faber's house, this is where we get the title of our second part. He's on the subway, flying by real fast. There's this obnoxious advertising jingle that's playing nonstop, and he's trying to think, and he's trying to read, and he's thinking, maybe if I can desperately just even read a couple of sentences, I'll remember it. But then this obnoxious ad just keeps going over and over and interrupting his thoughts. And that's what is keeping the people from being able to think deeply and have meaningful conversations. Have you ever tried to talk to someone about something and there's just distraction? I think especially as when my kids were younger and we'd be at church or somewhere and I'd be trying to talk with somebody and my kids were running around causing chaos, and I'd be trying to talk with them and listen to them, but then I'm trying to watch my kid too and see where they're going and what they're doing. And it kind of pulls you out of the conversation. It's the same thing with our phones. We're trying to have conversations, but then our phones keep dinging and buzzing and alerting us, and we keep getting distracted by them. So it's pulling us out of deep, meaningful conversations. But he says this: once as a child, he had sat upon a yellow dune by the sea in the middle of the blue and hot summer day, trying to fill a sieve with sand, because some cruel cousin had said, "Fill this sieve and you'll get a dime." And the faster he poured, the faster it sifted through with a hot whispering. His hands were tired, the sand was boiling, the sieve was empty. Seated there in the midst of July without a sound, he felt the tears move down his cheeks. And so that's what Montag is doing in this chapter. I think he's trying to grasp for truth, real truth, and that it's just pouring through him. And it's like, he knows that if he can fill up this bucket, he'll get a dime, he'll get something of value. It's like, if I can fill up my brain, I'll get something of value, but I can't. It just keeps going in and out, in and out. He doesn't know what to do. And fortunately, he's going to go to someone who thinks who should be able to help him with that. And so then we get this picture of him trying to read the Bible, and he keeps getting this Denham's dentifrice, that commercial that keeps pounding into his head. And I couldn't help but think of Inside Out, which is a marvelous Pixar movie. And you remember that there's like a commercial jingle that gets stuck in everybody's head, and it's like this running gag throughout the movie. I thought about that as I was reading this. He's trying to read the Bible, and it keeps, disrupting and distracting him and all that. And I wondered if Bradbury picked this passage for a particular reason or not. He's reading the section about consider the lilies. And if you're not familiar with that, it's in Matthew, I believe, chapter 6. And he, in that passage is talking about how God cares for, the lilies of the field, and God cares for the birds of the air, and that we ought not to be anxious or worried because it doesn't do any good, but also because God cares for those animals, and they're, helpless and defenseless and simple. Doesn't it make sense that God would care even much more for you, because you are of greater value to him than, even the birds of the air are? And not that they're without value, and God cares for them. God takes care of them. God provides for them. He cares for you so much more. Don't you think he's going to care for you? So that section of Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. And I wondered if that was a particular choice by Bradbury or not. I don't know that. But I think it's fascinating in contrast with what's happening right now. He is worried. He is scared. He is at his wit's end, and he's anxious. And, he is in a passage that is written expressly to reassure people who are anxious that God cares for you, to have faith, to trust him. And then the cares of the world, the advertising of the world is just pounding into his head just over and over, and he can't even concentrate and read that passage. And you get this scene where he's, basically yelling at the advertisement, and runs off the subway. Everyone there probably thinking he's some kind of crazy weirdo. He gets to Faber's house, finally convinces Faber to let him in and to trust him. And he presents Faber with this book. The Bible is something of great value, both intellectually and spiritually, to many, many people. And Faber realizes that Montag, is a fireman, and he stole a book, and he says, "You're brave." And he says this about being brave in the face of death. He says, "No," said Montag, "my wife's dying. A friend of mine's already dead. Someone who may have been a friend was burnt less than 24 hours ago." And that's the woman from the last part. He says, "You're the only one I knew might help me to see." Montag gives Faber the book. Faber says this interesting thing about Jesus, and about how society has even watered down God. He says, "I often wonder if God recognizes his own son the way we've dressed him up, or is it dressed him down? He's a regular peppermint stick now, all sugar, crystal, and saccharin, when he isn't making veiled references to certain commercial products that every worshiper absolutely needs." And then he goes on to talk about how he loves the smell of books. And we'll get to another quote he says I think is very powerful. But Faber said, what Faber said about watering down Jesus, again, taking the offensive parts of religion and removing it or changing it, and you get left with nothing. You get left with something very flimsy and foolish. Jesus said about the Bible that the world would find the message of the cross offensive. And so what do we want to do with things that are offensive? Well, we change it or ignore it. So you get one group of people wanting to, dilute and water down and change and focus maybe only on one thing. of the Bible and neglect everything else. But then you get this other group, that claims to be the religious right and all that, but they are also not accurately presenting what's in the Word of God. They go and do their own thing and use it for their own advantage. They twist and change it to say and give them the reason to do what they want to do. I don't want to get too far down that path, I guess, but be very careful how you use those things. In Fahrenheit 451's world, the message of Christ has been diluted down to the point where he's just this sweet saccharine character that sells products on TV. And I probably am being irreverent now, but I'm trying to think of what kind of commercial products Jesus might sell that might I might stray into blasphemy there. So I think we'll just leave that alone. But Faber goes on to talk about, he says some hard truth here. He says, "Mr. Montag, you are looking at a coward. I saw the way things were going a long time back. I said nothing. I'm one of the innocents who could have spoken up and out when no one would listen to the guilty, but I did not speak and thus became guilty myself. And when finally they set the structure to burn the books using the firemen, I grunted a few times and subsided, for there were no others grunting or yelling with me by then. And now it's too late." That really reminds me of the saying, and I'm going to butcher this quote, that all it takes for evil to rise is for good men to do nothing. And, Faber acknowledges that some of this is his fault, is that he could have said something. He had been trained to say something, you could say, because I believe he was a professor, but he didn't. He was a coward, by his own words. Montag continues on in this discussion, and he says, we have everything we need to be happy, but we aren't happy. Something's missing. And you look at that, there is something's missing. And Faber says that there are three things that are missing. He says, number one, do you know why books such as this are so important? Because they have quality. So he says what we need, what is missing from our society is books or even things of quality. He says that even, TV and in the family, the videos can be things of quality, but they're not. They're just basically advertising shallow worldviews. And the second thing that they are missing, he says, is leisure. The time to read things of quality. So, that they've kept them busy and distracted and always on the go. And there's no time to sit and to rest and to read and to devour these books. And then the third thing is that society was missing is that the right to carry out actions based on what we learn from the interaction of the first two. And that's incredible. And Montag says, well, I can get you books. And he says, and Faber says, well, you're running a risk to do it. Montag says, that's the good part of dying. When you've nothing to lose, you run any risk you want. I think Montag realizes he's dead already. So why not do everything he can to help bring society back to life? And Faber, throughout their discussion, goes on to say that we are too far gone. We need to destroy it all and start over. The skeleton needs melting and reshaping, as he said. And they realized that with war coming, there might be an opportunity to do that. And so Montag is going to get back into the game, and they have these little earpieces they're going to wear, which is really fascinating because we have that technology today to do that. And this was written again back in the 50s. Some technology that Bradbury is predicting there. They have somewhat of a plan for Montag to try to get books and rescue and save books, and that Faber will know what to do. It's kind of a desperate plan, not a very well thought out plan, but it's a plan. So I want to read you a quote from the SparkNotes website that I thought was interesting. He says that it says there that Faber says that people need quality information, the leisure to digest it, and the freedom to act on what they learn. And he defines quality information as a textured and detailed knowledge of life, knowledge of the pores on the face of humanity. So, you know all the details, not just the generalities. And Faber agrees with Mildred that television seems more real than books, but he dislikes it because it is too invasive and controlling. Books at least allow the reader to put them down, giving one time to think and reason about the information they contain. And this is where I got to be careful, when I'm reading, and I tend to read, and I can get where I read really fast and really tear through books. And I got to remember that not every book, that some books deserve time to meditate on and to savor and to taste, which is what I hope we're doing with Fahrenheit 451. So we'll go ahead and wrap up today's reading. I got to about page 88. And so for the next video, we'll cover the second part of part 2. A couple questions I want to leave you with. First of all, what do you think of this section overall? Let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of Faber's 3 things that we need? Quality information, the leisure time to read it, and the right to act on what we learn. What do you think about that? I might still meditate on that and think about that here in the next couple of weeks. And then, this is more of a comment, but I really appreciate that Bradbury writes that you can get quality information from videos and movies and things, but it can easily, there's a warning side to it too. It can easily become very invasive and controlling and so overstimulating that it doesn't give you time to stop and reflect and think. And then I was thinking, if our minds are like a sieve and we're trying desperately to hold the truth in our minds, but it just pours out, how do we plug the holes? How do we make it so that we can think and hold on to what is truth and not manipulated? I don't know. I'll be thinking over that in the next couple of weeks as well. All right, well, that'll be it for me today. So stay tuned for next week. We will cover the rest of part 2 of Fahrenheit 451. Until then, happy reading and take care.